Hi. Alright, the Oxygen software development kit. Let's say you download Oxygen from our website, you start using it and you say, well, this is great, does what I want, but we have a certain user group and they have specific problems. For example, you have an XPath toolbar when you start Oxygen and they find it intimidating. They want to migrate from Frame, so you have too many toolbar buttons and you have your main menu is full of options that I do not want the end users to toggle. Maybe I do not want them to find the Oxygen preferences and so on. So you take Oxygen, but you do not want to use it as it comes. You want to make different customizations to it. So we will discuss about how a plugin for a standalone Oxygen product is composed, about how specific XML vocabularies can be edited using a framework configuration. And then we'll take such a framework configuration created in Oxygen standalone version and bundle it with the auto component project so that maybe you can embed XML visual editing in your application. So the standalone version of Oxygen allows you to implement a plugin for Oxygen. It also allows you to implement a framework for it. A plugin can be used to customize the behavior of the entire application, no matter what XML document is being edited. So you can take a plugin and remove, for example, toolbar buttons from Oxygen's main toolbar. Or maybe you can add a new menu to Oxygen's main menu. Or contribute custom views or custom toolbars to Oxygen. Toolbars which have your own actions. While a framework can be used to provide special validation, content completion or editing support for specific XML vocabulary. I open a data document in Oxygen, I have the data toolbar. I open a docbook document in Oxygen, I have the docbook toolbar. Let's get to Oxygen. Let's say you have an Oxygen installed on your hard drive, and Oxygen comes with a plugins folder, which is usually empty. But right now on my side I have installed a couple of plugins. So let's start by dissecting one of the plugins. A plugin is a folder which contains a series of resources. The most important is the plugin.xml, which describes what this plugin does. So it has an ID, a version, a vendor, because it is not necessarily a plugin created by Synchrosoft, but maybe a plugin created by a vendor. It has a main plugin class, and it also specified a set of Java libraries to be loaded by this plugin. But a plugin does not provide by itself a certain functionality. It provides the possibility to add plugin extensions. And this particular plugin adds two extensions to the equation. A workspace access plugin. This workspace access plugin is notified when Oxygen starts. So it can call different Java API and, for example, remove toolbar buttons, add toolbar buttons, add separate menu items which can be called and do certain specialized actions on your XML files. And this is an option page plugin, plugin extension. Such an extension contributes an option page to Oxygen's preferences page. The same plugin contributes a custom view and a custom toolbar to Oxygen. Let's see how this works. For example, the plugin, the Works Resources plugin I installed contributed a custom CMS action, CMS menu. So it contributes a CMS menu with check-in and check-out actions. When the user presses these actions, the plugin uses our Java API maybe to connect to a CMS server. This is the type of plugin which is usually implemented by a CMS vendor, so that Oxygen can communicate with the remote location and the check-in, check-out files, and so on. But it also contributes custom toolbars. For example, this plugin has contributed a custom toolbar called CMS, also with check-in and check-out actions. It has also contributed a view which is called CMS messages, which might show some messages coming from the CMS side. But such a custom view can also be contributed. For example, you make a data customization and you want to have a view with all the reusable content inside, a list of reusable elements. So you contribute this view, and maybe you can then drag and drop elements in the main editor and make content references to them. After someone, let's go to the options preferences. So the same plugin I showed you contributes a preferences page. This is the page contributed by the plugin in Oxygen's general preferences. Because let's say you have a plugin for accessing the CMS, and that plugin has certain options that it wants to persist between two sessions. So instead of having its own way of saving the options to disk, it can contribute this custom preferences page, which saves the options using our API to the general Oxygen options. Once you create such a plugin, you can, for example, zip it and give it to other people and say, okay, take this zip, copy it to your plugins folder, expand it, restart Oxygen, and you should have that new toolbar in place. You should have that new main menu. The special view should work, and so on. But also recently, about a couple of versions ago, we added an add-on update site mechanism. So maybe you can zip this plugin, you copy with it a special XML configuration file, and all other users go to this add-on preferences page and point their Oxygen to your update site. So if a CMS has such a plugin bundle like this, all users can say, okay, I add another update site to the HTTP server from that web server, okay, and then Oxygen will explore that update site and propose you to install that plugin automatically. It installs the plugin, you restart Oxygen, and again you have the plugin available and enabled. All the plugins installed in Oxygen are listed here in the plugins preferences page. If you want to disable a certain plugin, you just click and it will be disabled the next time you start Oxygen. Other types of interesting plugins that we have this startup plugin. This allows you to filter out buttons from Oxygen interface. So it's a specialized plugin which you give certain IDs of actions that you do not want to appear in Oxygen. For example, you can remove the XPath toolbar because maybe some people do not know what XPath is. Or maybe remove the spell checking or other functionality that by default appears on the Oxygen toolbar. We also have this handy custom protocol plugin, which was implemented by all CMSs which chose to support Oxygen, to communicate with them and check in and check out resources. Because once you open a document in Oxygen, Oxygen treats this document as an URL. So it doesn't work with it considering that the file is on the local file path. It works by abstraction. So usually a CMS implements a custom protocol, and then Oxygen requests content for the XML from this custom protocol, and then again when the user saves, it calls the CMS to save the resource back to the remote location. So as I told you, you can add or remove toolbar buttons. You can add custom views, or maybe you can take some of the views provided by Oxygen and change their content completely. Maybe you do not want the user to use the project view, for example, for some reason. You can add custom preference pages, and also you can add custom URL chooser extensions. This is also used by CMSs. Let's say I have a data document opened. And I want to insert a link. What you see here is that my plugin, the Workspace Access plugin, has changed the default browse section for all dialogues using this. So instead of browsing the local file system for a reference, I can browse the CMS, and then the CMS can show me the remote resources instead of showing me the local file system. So with one hook, you can add to all the URL choosers in Oxygen an action which can do your custom browsing, maybe on a virtual file system. You have plenty of API available. You can force certain global options to be the way you want. Maybe you do not want the users to, for example, you want all your users to have automatic spell checking enabled, but Oxygen comes with it disabled by default. So you create a plugin which via Java extensions sets these options forced. So it forces automatic spell checking for all users who have this plugin installed. A plugin can listen for workspace specific events, like when a document is opened, closed or saved, and add specific hooks which may trigger specific actions based on this. It can also add listeners to the current edited documents, maybe to see if a document has been changed. Maybe it can add a specific action which, when triggered, modifies the current editor. Another API we have is to contribute custom validation problems. Let's say you have an XML document which has a DTD associated. You edit that document and it produces some errors. But also when editing that document, you want to call some, let's say some web service or some custom Java method and test that XML, take some values from it and send them to a server and validate them, and then get the results back and show them together with the errors collected by the DTD validation. So this is an extra step in which you can use to add additional custom problems to the problems already reported by Oxygen via the other means like DTD validation, schematron validation, and so on. We also have some data-specific API for setting, for example, a data keys resolver. If the people are using data 1.2 and the data content is located on the CMS, maybe the CMS can impose a certain data map which which is the master key resolver map for all your projects.
That was one of the main issues when we integrated Data 1.2 with the CMS. You need a key scope, basically, to say when you edit a topic, what's the scope of the keys when you edit that.
Moving on to frameworks. Let's say you open a file in Oxygen, and initially Oxygen does not know what it is, so it starts looking at the file header and the root element, and it has to take the decision to load or not a specific framework for providing special editing actions for that XML file. And this is done here in the document type association list. So you want to open an XML file, and Oxygen starts looking in it and has to decide, well, I'm going through this list, which document type is specific to this XML file. And he takes each document type in order and looks and says, okay, the data quick topic, let's see the association rules. And he says, okay, the root local name is topic, it's okay. The public ID is topic, so it's okay because I'm opening an XML. But the attribute does not have the revision attribute set to quick. So this doesn't match. So Oxygen searches next, and searches and searches until it finds the data document type. And in that data document type, it finds a certain association rule which works with the data topic, and says, okay, the XML that the user wants to open is data. So right now, Oxygen knows that the XML is data. It can use the data framework to add specific editing actions. For example, for data, it will impose certain CSSs used to edit data in the visual editing page. Data comes with a lot of actions. George showed you the actions he had defined for the quick topic. These are a lot of specific actions. Actions which, by the way, do not have the name and description written directly in the text fields, because Oxygen uses editor variables to try and provide internationalization for its document types. So the data document type does not say that the bold action should be called bold. It says that a certain key should be looked in a special XML file, and the name for that should be extracted and used as the name. And as you change the user interface in Oxygen, the data document type will also change, and you switch to the German, and then all the actions have German names and German tooltips, and so on.
Because initially we had support for localization in Oxygen in the user interface, but not also the framework level. And then you had Oxygen in German, but the actions for data were in English. So we added this support also in
the actions were called insert table, but Oxygen had all the German menus translated correctly, and all the other toolbar actions were consistent with the German language. After you define actions, you can bind them to the main menu, to the main data menu. Let me show you. So in the data, I'm editing a data topic, and I have a data menu which has these actions added to it. This is done here. So the main menu, the main data menu, the same thing, has the actions added in order to it, maybe with a separator or two added between them. You can then add actions to the content completion, to the contextual menu, which shows up when you right-click a data topic, or maybe remove from them. So if I right-click here, there are actions contributed by, like space special action contributed directly by the data framework, or insert table and so on, insert paragraph section. These are all contributed by the document type. Then you go to the toolbar. There's a specific toolbar for visual editing, and you can take already defined actions and for example, you take the bold action, move it here. I've just doubled it, click OK. And then you see that I've just doubled the action on the toolbar. So this document type controls a lot of the functionality that you get when editing a data document. And then we have this content completion tab. As I told you, the content completion window in data does not contain only the required elements in that specific context. It also contains some actions, for example, the table wizard, to easily insert a table with a certain number of rows and columns, or the image wizard. So again, you contribute actions to it, and then you find those actions when pressing enter in the data topic. George already showed you the templates tab. You create some files on disk, which are your new document templates in a specific folder in your framework. You link to that specific folder, and then when you create a new data topic, you will find this folder here. These are exactly the same folders which are configured in the data document type. Moving on, you can add catalogs in your document type specialization. You can add transformations. For example, for data, you have a data topic to PDF and data topic to XHTML as some default transformations which can be chosen. And these transformations then appear when clicking this button. So I open a data topic, and then I can publish it to PDF without any additional customization. Then you have the validation tab, in which you can impose specific validation configuration on your data topic. For example, for data, it is not validated only against the DTDs. It has several validation engines which are called when you are editing data content. The first validation stage, which is called, validates the data XML with the associated using the detected schema. After this validation, the file is again processed, but this time using a schematron schema. It's a schematron which has mandatory checks that the DTDs cannot express, or the XML schemas. And then we have a specific data validation engine which is applied. I'm just showing this for you on data, but the main idea is that you can do the same for your XML vocabulary, or you can copy our data framework and modify it, and maybe remove actions from the toolbar, maybe add your custom actions and so on. So I've covered this. After you create a framework folder, you can share it with the others. Oxygen has a frameworks folder, so you can tell the others, well, take this framework and copy it to your frameworks folder, restart Oxygen, and in the document type association list you have a new document type there which will react when you open the XML documents specific to your work. Oxygen also has the possibility to specify additional frameworks folders. right here. So by default, Oxygen uses that frameworks folder, which is inside Oxygen installation folder. But you can also say, well, I want to specify additional frameworks directories, because maybe the users do not have enough rights to modify the Oxygen installation folder. So I can add additional frameworks directories here. For example, some customers have a shared network in which they add their custom frameworks folder, and each user adds that shared network folder to their Oxygen configuration, then restarts Oxygen, and Oxygen will use the frameworks from that shared location. And if they make a modification common to everybody, everybody will restart Oxygen and they will benefit from that modification.
Yeah. Which protocol can we refer to in the remote framework? I'm thinking HTTP or...
Right now it only supports the file protocol, so you would have to have a shared network folder, you know, like the Windows yeah. But we plan maybe for the future something via HTTP. Yeah. Thanks. Or you can zip a framework, add an XML descriptor to it, upload it to an HTTP website, and all users add another location to that. Oxygen has a way of synchronizing the current framework with the remote one. So it will first install your framework, and then on subsequent rerun it will always test for changes. Maybe the version of your framework has changed, and Oxygen needs to update the framework to reflect those changes.
So currently, if I want to use HTTP, the update site is the best option, right?
Mm-hmm. You have to zip the framework folder.
In a jar,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have a video demonstration for this.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I've already showed you how specific actions are placed in that list, from the list of data specific actions, and then you can bind the specific actions to a Java operation. Not necessarily write your own Java operation, because we deliver a lot of Java operations like insert XML fragment and change attribute and so on. We deliver them in the standard distribution. There is a lot of API on this side. You have a content completion handler which can be added. Let's say you do not want to show the user all the elements available from the schema. For example, we have users who use data, and they say we do not want end users to enter the bold element. They should enter UI control, for example. And usually you say, well, you can specialize data and remove it from the list. And sometimes they say, no, that this is harder. We need maybe a way to do this differently, instead of specializing the data document type, the data DTDs, and removing this element. Let me show how a content completion handler can work. Let's say that I have a topic, and this paragraph has a revision attribute, and nothing is proposed for me as a choice. So then I can go and install this Java extension. First I go to the class path, and I've already added references to the library which contains this extension. And then in the extensions tab, I say I want a content completion handler, and Oxygen finds this handler in the Java library and loads it up. Then I click OK. And then this handler will contribute to the values offer for me with values 1.0 and 2.0. So these values do not come from the schema. They are proposed by this Java content completion handler. If we look inside the handler, it contains a Java library which looks at an XML configuration file. And this configuration file can be made quite flexible. Right now it says something like, well, whenever you encounter the attribute revision, you should add these two values to it. But it can also do stuff like this. Well, whenever you encounter this element in this namespace, apply this style sheet, and the style sheet shall return values for it. And maybe that style sheet can connect to a web service and request values from a dictionary on a remote location. This particular customization was developed by my colleague Alex, and we plan to deliver it as a default to Oxygen. So once you will have this library added by default to your Oxygen installation, you will just have to create that XML document and say this is similar to the subject scheme example I showed you for data, how the subject scheme can control several values on certain attributes. This is a special XML configuration file which can be used with anything, not only data. And you will say that for this element with this attribute, I want to add these additional items to the content completion list.
I just want to mention that this links to the schema.com presentation when I showed you that we can check the rev attributes, the values for the revision attributes. So now you can get a proposal with those values. And the initial case when we used this was that XSL went to an Exist database and actually got the values from the database. This is what we made this for initially.
More extensions. Drag and drop listener. Maybe you have your custom view, or maybe you drop something from outside Oxygen. Then you install this drag and drop listener in the visual editing part. You take the dropped object and maybe you create an XML structure which represents it, and you can insert it back in the visual editing document. For example, what I showed you for data, when I dropped files in the data topic, and then automatic links were created back to those files. References resolver. For example, when you insert a data content reference in the visual editing part, you can see visually the reference content just like it would be located there. Let's say I give an ID to this, and then I insert a content reference. To it. So as you see, for data, I have a content reference, and it shows the content of the reference embedded in the visual editor without editing functionality. This is not built in for data. We use this API to bind to data and show this. We also have this API implemented for X-includes, which are a generic way of including content. But maybe you have your own way in your XML vocabulary to include certain fragments, and you want the visual editor to show the fragments as they would be in that location already included. CSS styles filter. George showed you how to write a CSS and how you can customize the XML in the visual editing page to add borders, colors and fonts and so on. Maybe sometimes the XSL is too restrictive. Maybe you cannot do everything. The CSS is too restrictive, and you cannot do everything with the CSS. Although it has those extensions like OxyXPath, which make it quite flexible. For example, maybe there are situations in which you cannot write a certain CSS selector which expresses what you want to obtain. For example, you can with CSS you can match a certain node, but you cannot match a node which has a certain child node. So I cannot match a certain topic which has a certain title element. And you can do this from the CSS styles filter. This is Java-based API. This API receives callbacks for each style that Oxygen is willing to apply to the visual editing part, and it can take that style object, that API, and maybe add borders to it, colors, create content, and so on. So it's for the special situations in which the CSS is not enough.
We've seen this, for instance, when someone wanted to take into account the actual width of the page and provide a specific, very specific layout of how the information looks like. So they use this to take into account the actual size of the editor.
Okay, so we have a lot of API related to tables, node render customizers. In the outline, for example, for certain nodes you can show certain icons and so on. External object insertion handler, which deals, for example, with pasting HTML from a browser, like I showed you in data, and transforming it to the target XML vocabulary. Custom attribute value editor. You want to edit a certain attribute in the attributes view using a custom editor. And then you can take a framework. You have created a framework. For example, George created the quick data specialization. You take this framework and you deliver it to the author component project, which can be used to embed the visual editing part in any application. So I took George's framework, I embedded it with the component, and I created a small application called the reviewer application. And again, you have the full functionality here. As I edit, change tracking is enabled by default. Just in the Ixia presentation, you control the toolbars, you control everything here. So you can remove the change tracking buttons from the toolbar. You can add additional buttons. It's like a cookbook. We just deliver you some components, and you take these components and create your own custom application. Then you take this application, which has the full functionality of Oxygen. It just does the same thing as George showed you, with a plus and minus to remove and add sections. It is restrictive. For example, I can go to the read-only mode and have nothing editable, or I can go to the text editing and I cannot add sections anymore because I should edit only the text, or the full editing. This is done via the API. You take this component, you use it in your standalone product, or maybe as a Java applet in your CMS, like Componize, Ixia and others. That's about it.
Basically, as you see, once you define a custom interface, then you can push it also on a custom application or on a very simple application. It doesn't need to go with all the Oxygen side views or buttons or actions or options. In this case, you have only open, save, cut, copy, paste, undo, redo, find, replace, and some of the, in this case, some of the change tracking and the reviewing functionality. But you can remove also that if you want.
Any questions?
Yes?
Yes.
You talked about frameworks and about being able to modify them. What if you want to just do some small modifications to a framework and allow that to extend the existing framework, so you can supply a small number of modifications and allow a customer to download those from your add-on to their version of, say, Gitter or Dotbook?
We just discussed this even the other days before the conference, that we need like extension points into the frameworks, so you can contribute, like additional actions, and you can contribute to a framework, not necessarily another framework. So there are two ideas. One is to be able to extend, like in object-oriented way, extend the framework and modify it, right? Another one is to allow to add extension points within a framework and then just plug in additional functionality for that framework. So we are thinking about that.
Anything else?
It's time for a break.
Thank you.